You're listening to Three Things to Know with Stephanie Haney, with experts and insiders on what you need to know in Northeast Ohio.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Three Things to Know podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie Haney, and I am thrilled to have you here with me again for another edition of Three Things to Know. And today we're talking about something really fascinating that has been kind of in the zeitgeist, if you will. This is something that I've been seeing kind of circulating online, and something where I was in the newsroom the other day and I looked up on the TV and saw on Daily Blast Live, which is something that airs on NBC3 here in Cleveland. It's a national show, that they were talking about this trend of moms microdosing mushrooms. And I've been hearing a bit about it here and there. So I thought, this is something that we should maybe explore and be talking about. So I looked into it a little bit. We found an expert here in the Northeast Ohio area who's willing to talk to us. It's Dr. Barnett. We'll get into his qualifications in a minute. But first, I want to just talk a little bit about this trend. So as I said, they were talking about it on Daily Blast Live. There was this article, this particularly in-depth article that I came upon from Harper's Bazaar. It was published in April, and it talks about these parents, and it really kind of showcases the situation of these two parents living together in Brooklyn, New York, and how they had been microdosing mushrooms 3 to 5 times a week, and how it had, they said, positively impacted their parenting. This was a situation where there was a child from a previous relationship, so there's a step-parent situation. I'm going to link you to the Harper's Bazaar article. It'll be linked on WKYC.com and in the show notes and in the YouTube video of this so that you can find it. Fascinating. And then another couple profiled in the article had talked about how it had helped them with their relationship issues. And this is obviously all anecdotal. These are specific situations. And I also have to point out, it's illegal. It's not legal to do this, but people are talking about doing it. And there is a bit of a movement in the medical world toward this. So here's some of the things that were talked about in that article, and you can read about it more in depth. But it was kind of in the late 1990s that the medical world started picking up on wanting to study and see how psychedelics might impact people mentally. And then in the past couple of years, there's been more of a trend toward it, and looking at psychedelics and the benefits in the mental health space when it comes to depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, for instance. So let me name a couple of these studies. In JAMA Psychiatry, JAMA, that's the Journal of the American Medical Association Psychiatry version. In 2020, they found that psilocybin-assisted therapy, and psilocybin, by the way, is the active ingredient in these so-called magic mushrooms, in the psychedelic mushrooms. So psilocybin-assisted therapy had reduced or eliminated symptoms of major depressive disorder in 71% of participants within 4 weeks. That's definitely significant, no matter what you're thinking about the legality of this issue or the potential pitfalls or the potential benefits. That's significant. And then there was an earlier study published in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease that reported about LSD being used in psychotherapy sessions. Now, we're not really getting into LSD today. We're kind of specifically talking about the magic mushroom trend. We may talk about LSD a little bit with our expert, but in this study, people who had been diagnosed with life-threatening illness experienced decreased feelings of anxiety. Here's something else that's interesting. The FDA is expected to approve the use of MDMA, that's ecstasy, or Molly, which is a street name for a particular type of it, in conjunction with talk therapy to treat PTSD. And that could come as soon as next year. So there is movement happening in this space. So this is a time to be talking about this thing. It's kind of on the cutting edge. And there's work being done with it here in Cleveland. So we're talking with today Dr. Brian Barnett. And he is the co-director of the Treatment-Resistant Depression Clinic at the Cleveland Clinic. And he has been working in this space. So he is the person to get us in the know on this. He's waiting right now, so let's bring him in right now. Dr. Barnett, thanks for making time with us on the Three Things to Know podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, this is a fascinating topic. We've seen it kind of a lot in the media. There are articles in Harper's Bazaar. They were just talking about it on Daily Blast Live. So what we're talking about today is this trend, or at least this thing that we're hearing about now, is microdosing with mushrooms, and particularly with moms, it seems to be a trend. So we're going to get into all of this today. But what I want to ask you first is removing the legality from the question. Why are people doing this? Why are we seeing people talking about this right now?
So there's a lot going on in the psychedelic space right now. It started out with clinical trials of full doses of psychedelics, particularly psilocybin, which is the active component of magic mushrooms. And then there are other studies going on now with things like LSD, where they're beginning to find evidence that there could be benefit for mental health issues from these compounds. And over the last decade or so, this has expanded into microdosing, where people take smaller doses of these compounds that don't really produce perceptual changes. But many people believe that that leads to improvements in things like anxiety, depression, can also help with creativity, giving people an energy boost. And so there's lots of reasons that people are doing this.
Interesting. Magic mushrooms as an alternative to caffeine for the decaf drinkers out there. I'm one of them. Okay, so let's talk about that. You talk about microdosing versus something that would make a perceptual change. So I want to talk about that. Say you were to take a full dose, whatever it is, of a psychedelic mushroom, whatever that amount would be. What would you expect that to do to your body? How would somebody interact with that or experience that?
So the psychological effects are usually the most profound element of the experience, and generally people report positive effects where they notice that their mood is lifted. They can see visual changes, visual hallucinations, and then if they have what's called a mystical experience, they can feel that they're one with the universe, or that they're having a very spiritual experience, possibly meeting God. And so that's been linked to the mental health effects in those clinical trials. However, these are very setting dependent. And so if you take one of these compounds and it's not in a setting where you're focused on wellness with people who know what they're doing, then you run the risk of a bad trip, and that can be very negative sometimes.
Okay, that was a question that I wanted to ask you about. I'm going to ask you that next, but first we were talking about a larger dose. So how does that compare? Hallucinations doesn't really seem like something that a mom, let's say, could really kind of handle in a day-to-day when she's trying to take care of a child. So how does the reaction change when we talk about a microdose versus the full dose?
Yeah, so microdoses are generally 1/10 to 1/20th a standard dose, and so the aim that people are going for when they do this is to have a sub-perceptual dose. So that means that they're not feeling any change in their cognition, how they're relating to the world, not having impairments in things like attention or their judgment. And so that's where the potential benefits of microdosing are thought to come from.
Okay. The dangers, though, we have to talk about the dangers. You had mentioned if you're not in a setting where you're with maybe a trusted person who has, quote, been on this trip before, we'll say. What are some of the dangers that can come from dabbling in this space?
Well, on the microdosing side, there have not been a lot of randomized controlled trials, but there have been quite a few survey studies and observational studies where they ask people who've been doing this, what have you been experiencing? And they systematically collect data. And people in those studies, they generally report that problems with microdosing are pretty rare or pretty mild, but sometimes people can get anxious. They can notice that it's hard to pay attention to what they're doing. Occasionally it's hard to find the right words. There's also evidence showing some increases in blood pressure and heart rate. And a lot of this it's difficult to tease out because these are people doing this on their own at home. So are these people really taking what they intended to be a microdose, or this involves people buying mushrooms on the black market, often crushing them up, putting them in liquid, maybe using a dropper. And so it's very hard to say whether they're actually using microdoses, or maybe the dose is a little bit higher than a microdose and they are feeling some of those psychological effects that you would from a normal or macro dose.
Okay. And I have to wonder, no, you talk about people getting these on the black market in places. Is that where people are getting these psychedelic mushrooms to do this? Or where, if it's become such a trend, I'm just wondering who knows how and where to get these things.
The so I have a training in addiction psychiatry. So I do work with a good number of patients who have used a variety of drugs and access them in different ways. And my my experience in talking with patients recently is that most people are still buying them, still getting them from friends. But these are not things that have typically been as accessible as other drugs until recently. But one of the unique things about mushrooms is that they do grow in the community, and so if you are able to learn how to identify them safely, which there are risks because you could mistake them for other mushrooms, which could be potentially fatal, then some people are able to pick them on their own or even grow them in their own house.
Interesting. I guess it just seems like something that happens so far away. You don't think about magic mushrooms just kind of growing in a park in Northeast Ohio, but I guess they do, right?
Yeah, there are species that are native to Ohio.
Interesting. Okay. So it seems to have become very popular among moms. At least that's who we're hearing about in these stories that are coming out now. Again, there was recently a feature on Daily Blast Live about it. There was a big article in Harper's Bazaar about it. Do you have any insight into why moms specifically seem to be kind of getting on this microdosing of mushrooms trend?
So when you emailed me the Harper's article, I read through that and I was actually surprised by that because most previous studies have shown that people who microdose tend to be men, maybe in their 30s, and so it does seem like there could be a shift in demographics there, and I think there are a lot of reasons why this might be happening. We're noticing a larger number of people who are not responsive to standard psychiatric treatments. And so if they're dealing with depression, anxiety, things that, particularly come up during parenthood and for mothers who are often the ones primarily caring for children, then, it could be that we don't have the right treatments to offer some of these people. And they're looking for them on their own, hearing about research on TV and on the internet and, taking things into their own hands.
Okay. Fascinating. We've talked about the microdose. You said it's 1/10 to 1/20th of a full dose. I guess, so other than people putting these on food scales, what are they doing to try and figure out what a microdose is?
So often like a food scale, might not even be sensitive enough to, get the right amount for this. And so there are more sensitive scales that people use, particularly if they're using LSD instead of psilocybin. So it seems like the two most popular psychedelics that are being used for this are LSD and psilocybin, but LSD is psychoactive at extremely tiny doses. And so often to try to get things to be more exact, because it's hard to, cut an LSD strip into, very in a very particular way that's precise, or cut mushrooms into the right weights. People will crush these up and add them to liquid and make droppers, and approaches like that to try to have more precision in getting the dosing right.
Okay. And working in this space, I have to ask too. So you've talked about psilocybin being the active ingredient in the psychedelic mushrooms. Is that in other medicines? Is there a reason people are tending toward kind of taking this into their own hands versus perhaps getting a prescription for psilocybin? Can you even get a prescription for psilocybin?
So you can't. So it's and I think that's one of the big risks with microdosing is psilocybin, LSD. These are still Schedule 1 drugs, and so the way that the federal government looks at them at this point is that they're drugs that have no medical benefit, which is arguable because there are studies countering that, but that they have a high risk of abuse. And so right now they are illegal to possess, and so you could run jail time if you're caught. But things are progressing, pretty quickly on the research front with psychedelics, particularly with psilocybin. And part of that is because psilocybin doesn't last as long as LSD. They're very similar compounds, but LSD can last up to 12 hours. And so it's much harder to work with logistically on the clinical side, whereas psilocybin is closer to 6 hours. But like I said, there's a lot of progress happening there. And so if trials continue to show benefit for things like depression and anxiety, we could see psilocybin approved as a medication probably within the next 4 to 5 years. And so at that point, it would be legal. I don't imagine there would ever be a point, although this could change, with microdosing research, where physicians would prescribe psilocybin to a patient and give it to them to take home. So the way that the the research is being done with the normal doses is you go to a therapist's office and you would get the psilocybin there and stay there during the entire experience. But yeah, that could change if microdosing research pans out.
Okay, fascinating. 4 to 5 years sounds like a long time, but that seems like a pretty quick turnaround in the medical world.
Yep, and there's a lot going on with MDMA, also known as ecstasy. So that one is actually a little further in the drug pipeline for post-traumatic stress disorder, and so it's looking like that could be approved within the next 2 years if the last clinical trial goes well that's needed to gain FDA approval.
It is always fascinating to think, I am a lawyer, so I've got the legal background. It's fascinating to think about things that exist in the natural world being illegal to possess. So that's just an interesting foil. And of course, we could get into a whole different conversation about the legality of like marijuana, for example, and things like that. But always fascinating to think about how it can be made a crime to possess something that just grows in nature.
And I don't know how much you follow this, but there's a big movement to decriminalize nature that's happening across the U.S. right now. So I think Ann Arbor decriminalized a lot of these plants and fungi. Oakland, California did as well. And then Oregon recently had decriminalization for the entire state. Denver's another city where this has happened. So a lot of people are questioning that notion of should things that occur naturally be illegal to possess.
Laws fluctuate all the time, and I always appreciate, just from somebody who appreciates seeing people take an active role in their government, I always appreciate that kind of initiative, especially at the local level, to question these things and say, hey, maybe just because something's been done a certain way for a long time doesn't mean it should always be done that way. Go ahead, were you going to say something?
I think from a societal perspective, it's always useful to reevaluate these things and make sure we're working with the existing data of the time to help us make these important public health decisions.
Of course, definitely. And we appreciate your insight on this. I've got one more question before we go for you. You may not have the answer to this. It's a very abstract question. Do you have any idea of the prevalence of this here in Northeast Ohio? Not necessarily just among moms, but among moms, if you have that insight, or just in general?
So it's really, really hard to say. The data collected on this are pretty minimal. So there's the U.S. government actually does a survey of people across the country every year. It's called the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, and they take a random sample of people from across the country, and they do these long interviews with them. They pay them a little bit, and they do these interviews in person, and they give them a computer for portions of it that are more sensitive, and they get rates of substance use for all kinds of different substances across the U.S. But that survey, it's like a lot of things going on right now with the research on psychedelics. It's struggling to catch up with all these changes, and so it doesn't specifically ask about microdosing. So we really don't have reliable data on that at this point. I think it's still pretty rare. I mean, I get the sense that it's much more prevalent on the coasts than in the middle of the country. But I do think it's something important that we do need to be gathering data on, and hopefully we'll see that survey effort by the government expand in the future so we could get numbers on this.
Okay. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating stuff. Dr. Barnett, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate your insight, and hopefully we can have you back soon as this topic grows and we see what happens with it.
That would be great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much. Okay, I had to take a little break after that conversation with Dr. Barnett because it's hot in here. I am recording this on the heels of the 90-degree days, an 80-degree day here in Cleveland. So if I was a little glistening, if I was glowing a little extra, you know why. So I had to go powder my face, but now we're back. So if you're watching this, you saw that. If you're listening to it, lucky for you, because you didn't get to see my face melting down my face. But anyway, thank you very much to Dr. Barnett for talking with us about this trend, the prevalence of the use of mushrooms for microdosing. Again, remember, it is illegal, so we're not recommending any illegal activity here, but just letting you know what's happening in this space. And very interesting to know about some of the things that are forthcoming. We'll definitely be following up with Dr. Barnett in the coming months because there are some interesting developments happening here in the Cleveland, Northeast Ohio area when it comes to this. All right, so if you're intrigued about mushrooms, let's get to what you need to know in NEO. I did a little looking around on Facebook. Facebook groups are so good for finding a community, and I found a group called Ohio Mushroom Enthusiasts. More than 20,000 members. It's a private Facebook group. So if you're interested in mushrooms, you can potentially join that if you're here in the Northeast Ohio area, or if you're in the Ohio area or the surrounding area. There are some rules to join the group, okay? I learned some new rules, or some new words as well while I was looking up this group. You have to be a mycophile, which is a mushroom lover, a mycophagist, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, it might be mycophagist, that's a mushroom eater, or a mycologist, which is someone who works with fungi and mushrooms, or a fungi enthusiast, and you have to live in Ohio or an adjacent state. Now, this is not a public group or anything, it's just a collection of individuals, and there are some rules. You've got to be in Ohio, or you have to be in a state that touches Ohio. You have to have been on Facebook for more than a month. They don't want any spammy accounts joining their group. And here's their important rule. If you recommend eating a mushroom that you cannot identify, you will be removed from the group. And they are also open to discussion of identification of fungi, but comments encouraging illegal activity are not permitted. But you are able to talk about the identification of fungi. So, but they're just saying, don't be telling people, do this illegal thing, but they are open to identification of certain types of mushrooms. You know, as we talked about with Dr. Barnett, his magic mushrooms are just growing out in the wild here in Northeast Ohio. So if you're interested in mushrooms, you know, both medicinal and not, that could potentially be a good group for you. It's a Facebook group. Again, it is called Ohio Mushroom Enthusiasts. I will link it in all of the places. It'll be linked on WKYC.com, on the show notes if you're listening on a podcast platform, and also in the YouTube information if you are watching on YouTube. And again, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm so sorry that you had to see my face sweating off of itself during that conversation with Dr. Barnett. And speaking of Dr. Barnett, that brings us to a good follow. He's our good follow this week. He's on Twitter. It's Brian Barnett, MD. That's BrianBarnett, MD. And that is where you can find him. And that's what he uses for his professional information. So in the psychedelic space and the other things that he is working in, if you're interested, you can follow him on Twitter there. Brian Barnett, MD, BrianBarnettMD. And that is it for our 3 Things to Know podcast this week. Thank you so much for being with me here today. I appreciate you. We've got some great stuff coming in the next couple of weeks. So if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast. Leave us a rating and review if you can. That really helps us connect with more people here in Northeast Ohio. And if you found this interesting, share it with a friend, because sharing is caring. And that's what we're all about here, wanting to expand our network here in the Northeast Ohio area and connect and really talk about the things that matter to all of you. So to that end, if there's something that you want us to talk about, or something that people need to know in NEO, or a good follow on social media, drop me a line, _Stephanie Haney on Twitter and Instagram. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/TheStephanieHaney, but I will tell you, it is much easier to get a response back from me on Twitter and Instagram, because my Facebook messages are a total disaster, and they are just a little bit more manageable for me on Instagram and Twitter. Okay, that's it for this week, my friends. I will see you back here next week with more 3 Things to Know.
Thanks for listening to 3 Things to Know with Stephanie Haney from WKYC Studios. Subscribe now to stay in the know.